Okay, we'll make a start. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming along. I was going to say for travelling all the way to the BCS meeting, but I'm sure you've just moved to from one room to another. I hope you're all safe and well and getting used to all this. Goodness me, it's a year now since it all changed. I recall doing a PhD Vive on the Friday afternoon before lockdown, and a student, my PhD student was in Dublin and wasn't allowed to travel because of the Aer Lingus or the Dublin government saying that they couldn't move. And I thought, this'll be over in 3 weeks. We'll be back to normal. Just shows how much I know, and indeed how much things change very, very quickly. So I'm really delighted that our friend and colleague Chris Bloomfield is going to talk to us about the Durham experience in the whole lockdown situation. Just to inform folks that the session is being recorded and so will be available on YouTube, I believe, at some point. So Chris has got his rights sorted and his appearance fees and all of that coming through the post. We are going to talk for about 40-45 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. Please feel free to use the chat. I'll be monitoring that, and if there's things that you want to put in there, then that would be tremendous. Okay, without any further ado, Chris, over to you.
Oh, good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for the invitation to come and talk. Let me just share my presentation and we'll get things underway. So, as Alistair said, I'm going to give you a bit of insight into how Durham has responded to the rapidly changing situation that's occurred over the last 12 months. And like Alistair, I recall being in London at an event in February, just as things were starting to unfold, and having some quite frank conversations about it. And I don't think anyone really appreciated quite how things would evolve from that point. But it's been a very interesting time for us all in the most recent period. So a little bit about Durham University. Sorry if I'm telling anybody things that they already know, but I appreciate that despite you all being in the region, you might not know some of the bits about the university as it stands at the moment. But we are regarded as the third oldest university in England. And one of the things that makes Durham very unique is the way in which students experience Durham through our 17 colleges, and that experience, I believe, is really unique. It's not the same as the Oxbridge model, and it's not like anything else you find in other UK universities. And then for those students who come to Durham, often if you meet them after they've graduated, the first thing they'll tell you is which college they lived in, and then they'll tell you which degree they read. So, we know from our former students that it really does mean a great deal to them. And university has grown over time. We're now up to around about 20,000 students and about 4,500 staff. And I think it's an environment, as you can see from the picture, a very attractive campus. But the combination of the city, the people, and the experience really does inspire people to do some quite interesting things. I found this slide, which I thought was quite useful, of what's been happening over the last 12 months. And I haven't tuned my presentation to this timeline, but I will from time to time refer to the fact that we've been in and out of lockdown a few times, and with that, what has been possible and what hasn't been possible has, of course, varied. And we find ourselves now still in a situation where we're in lockdown, and there are restrictions on what we can and can't do. So let me just then move on to the next bit. I mean, before I do, I should probably say that COVID has had this massive impact on higher education and how we have traditionally delivered what we're known for, which is education. It has created this great opportunity for us to innovate and lead in that response, but it has also challenged the fundamentals of our business model. And I think it's fair to say that most of the sector have treated the last 12 months with a degree of financial caution. And that has meant that in the context of operating within that, there have been some requirements to look at expenditure and see if we can adjust it. And some of that has been very pragmatic. So, you know, in the current situation, you might expect you haven't really got a great demand for your visitor Wi-Fi service on campus. So there's one of the things immediately you can begin to look at to look at reducing some of your operating costs. I work within the computing and information services aspect of the university. We are an organisation that works across the entire institution, and we've got a team of around about 170 people covering all aspects from first line service desk through to providing at-shoulder technical support and all the project management and other aspects that you might expect from an IT organisation. One of the things that we've been heavily involved in at the university over the last few years has been tackling what we call technical debt. And what we've been doing there is addressing some of our legacy and strengthening and developing our capability for the future. And we've run a number of really significant infrastructure investment programs that have looked to take the university forward. And I've put a few there in the chat. Throughout this presentation, you'll find various links off to websites or in fact case studies where we've got these things dealt in more detail, because I think there's a lot for me to talk about tonight and I haven't got time to go into all of the detail. But what I will say, that the big three set out to give us a new foundational infrastructure, and that gave us a new hosting platform. It gave us in the order of 4.5 petabytes of storage in our data centers on-prem. And it also led to the complete replacement of the university network. So we have put over 136 kilometers of new fiber optic cable in the ground throughout Durham. Most of that has gone into new ductwork, which we expect to get decades of use out of the ducts. And at some point we may need to replace the fibers, but it will be a lot easier now. We then, having delivered that by December 2019, embarked on a second phase of work to replace the network in our data centers and our network core. And we've moved to a new technology from Cisco called ACI, Application Centric Infrastructure. And we completed that work during the last 12 months. We finished in December 2020. And in fact, if you follow the link, you'll find that there's a video that we produced as part of Project Closure, which sums up some of what I've just described. But those foundational works have then allowed us to move on to the next thing. So one of those has been the Wi-Fi project. And we are in the process now of replacing our entire Wi-Fi estate. That's all of the access points and all of the infrastructure that sits behind. That work has also been running throughout COVID, and that for the project management team involved has been a real challenge. I think it's testament to the skill and quality and capability of that team that we are roughly on track. Amazingly, we don't seem to have really lost any ground, and I'm touching my wooden desk at this point, in that project. And I think part of the reason that we've been able to do that is we have had this approach to working in IT now, which is really embracing some of the principles that the new ITIL version 4 syllabus is pushing through. And it's great that we're now training our team up to be really cognizant of concepts like high velocity IT, agility, and using DevOps approaches, because I think we operate now in a society where you can download an app from an app store onto your phone and start using it straight away, and that is setting an expectation amongst the customer about how quickly IT can move. So why can't we do that in a large enterprise organization? Well, there are a few reasons, but we can begin to move towards that expectation being met in the future. Durham, like many other of the Russell Group universities, is research-led in its approach to education. And since the sad death of Stephen Hawking, Durham researchers are at the forefront of research into the origins of the universe. And at a previous BCS talk that we hosted at Durham, we actually provided a tour of the data center in which the Cosma supercomputer facility that is part of a broader DIRAC environment running across the country can be found. And we have recently completed a piece of work with Dell to become a centre of excellence for high performance computing and artificial intelligence. So some really interesting things happening in that space. And just here was just a little bit of the detail, because I think when we hosted that BCS talk at Durham and gave that data centre tour, we were talking about Cosmo 8, but the difference is we've now delivered it, and that link there under the Cosmo 8 side is off to that case study. But the other thing that we did, in our spare time during COVID and lockdown and everything else, was also to commission another high performance computing facility, which is known as BEAD. And BEAD forms part of the N8 Northern 8 universities that are research focused. And that particular facility has really come to the fore during the COVID pandemic, and is actually being used to help in the current challenges that we're facing as a country and a society more broadly. So again, really, really interesting video if you get the chance to go off and have a look at that after the event. The other thing that we have managed to achieve in the last 12 months has been the publication of our digital strategy. And huge kudos to my colleague, Dr. Simon Brownsell, and our CIO, John Hemingway, for the work that they did to really embed this within the university. It has been exceptionally well received. And what you can see here is the plan on a page, and that is one of 3 documents that were produced. There is a substantial strategy, cover of which is there, and there's also a 3rd document which is like the light touch version for people to have a look at as well. And those are foundational for a lot of the things that I'll talk about tonight, because I wanted to tackle the thorny issue of everyone working at home. Well, it didn't quite happen like that, because when COVID occurred and the country went into lockdown, we had students in accommodation in college that were kind of trapped because they couldn't go home because home was overseas. And throughout COVID, over the last 12 months and more, we've had a population at the university which has been in part resident. And of course, a number of university staff live on campus, including our Vice-Chancellor and others within our college environment. So we have had to sustain a base level of service with people working on campus. But the majority of the university has, as the slide suggests, been working from home. And for those people, that has often been a very challenging environment to work in. Our job within CIS, and particularly within the operations side, has been to provide the help and support for all of those people. And I think I was very pleased that way back in 2018, I'd visited ANS and their headquarters in Manchester, and had been very kindly given an insight into their service operations centre. And one of the things I took away from that trip to ANS was their approach to DR, and the fact that all of the staff working in that environment had the ability to be portable in their working. They all had laptops, they were all set up so that they could easily relocate and operate from a different location. And so in this photograph here, you can see on the left-hand side, Andy Scott, who's our service desk manager, and his deputy, Jane Ball, and some of the team at Durham. Andy and Jane and the team have really embraced that opportunity, and it meant that when we needed to move rapidly to home working, we were well placed for that. Initially, we used some remote access points. So we've got a couple of those shown at the bottom. Over the last 12 months, we've actually had to swap out some of those remote access points that we've issued to people who are home working. But we've also done other things that have kind of negated the need for that to be used as a means of accessing the university network completely. One of the other things that we've been doing at Durham over recent times has been to develop our approach to service management. We are part of a consortium within the UK. There are 11 universities that form part of a group called Unidesk, and we have a shared service platform for service management. What isn't shared at the moment is the contact centre approach. And of course, one of the functions of the service desk has been the ability for people to phone us up and get through to one of the team. And so one of the challenges we had to overcome was moving our contact center solution into that home working environment. One of the really interesting things there was initially when we transitioned the service desk team to home, they were still reliant on the IP handsets that they had been using in the office. But we have, over the last 12 months, been able to do away with those completely and move to a soft phone solution, which is based on the device. It just means that the desk environments for those people home working is a bit less cluttered. And the other really key thing for us in this space was around about the same time in 2018, Andy was set a target of increasing self-service. Back to my earlier point about people being used to downloading an app and having that instant access and much quicker response to things. And so Andy and the team have grown the use of self-service within our service desk function from less than 5% in mid-2018 to more than 50% of all the tickets that are now logged are coming in via a self-service portal. And in some cases, we've had some really great feedback from members of the university, because we've slashed process times from, in some cases, it's been 2 weeks to get a task done to now we're doing it in a couple of hours. And it's really made life a lot easier for a lot of people. One of the things we have done in the last 12 months has been to look at how we provide access, again, back to bond culture. People we find are much more inclined to want to send a chat message. So we have now someone working full-time responding to chat messages coming into our service desk, and we're working towards developing an AI chatbot capability that will be the natural extension to that. And if I have time, I'll talk on chatbots in a little while. One of the other things we had to do, we had moving to a home working environment, was provide kit. And pictured here is one of our laptop lockers. This one is in our library, but we have a couple of these facilities on the campus. One of the things we had to do was actually empty them and loan those devices out to people, because I think when we entered into the home working environment, we had around 2,000 users across the university who were still working in their normal day-to-day job when they were able to work in the university from a desktop. And we had to get all of those people onto laptops, because we agreed an approach which was we wouldn't let people take desktops home. So we had to get laptops into the hands of all of those people. Part of the raiding was from facilities like that and from other departmental caches. So for example, our geography department had a cache of laptops that supported fieldwork. But one of the other things we did was actually we had a lot of equipment that had been destined for recycling, and we had to, for a time, extend the lifespan on some of that kit and claim it back. And that was a coping mechanism. We have, I think I'm really pleased to say, moved to a position now we've replenished all of those facilities that were initially raided, because over time we've had to resort back to on-campus teaching, and that has meant that those facilities have been in demand. So there's been a lot of, we need to address the current problem. We need to be thinking about the other problems that will create in a knock-on effect, and make sure that we're covering off all of those requirements. And some of you might be asking this question, what about the software? Yes, that's a good question. So one of the first things that we did was to accelerate two things that we had already in the pipeline. We were already deploying Office 365, but when we realized what we were up against, we approached Microsoft and our engaged partners, and we really put our foot down on that exercise. And I think our approach to it actually caught the eye of Microsoft over in Seattle, and we produced a case study with them. The link is there, and we were able to get this amazing quote from our Vice Chancellor as part of that. Teams and Microsoft weren't the only ingredient in our success. The other thing that we also had in the pipeline was a business case to roll out Zoom as our next generation video conferencing platform, and we also accelerated that and put Zoom into service. And I should also add that there was a third layer to our approach, which was that we were also using a product called Blackboard Collaborate, which was about supporting teaching within the university as well. So we had this sort of tribe approach, and that just gave us a bit of flexibility. If we felt that for a particular use case, one of the technologies wasn't working, people had the choice to go and try one of the others. I thought this was an interesting number. I suspect if those of us on the call had a look at our personal devices, we might find that we have a modest number of pieces of software on it, maybe 20, 25 applications. We have a fair few more than that in deployment across the university. And this stat was drawn out of our software asset management system just this morning. So it is a bang up to date number, but we have had to find a way to allow people to carry on working, even if they're not on campus. And as you might appreciate, that has been somewhat challenging. But we also had another good news story there, which was several years ago, we struck up a relationship with a company called Software2, and we now have quite a mature implementation of a product called AppsAnywhere. And most of, if not all of the applications that I mentioned on the previous slide are available through this virtualized environment. It's virtualized so that you can run it on any host operating system, whether that's Mac or Windows or a Chromebook or a mobile. And in fact, as a bit of a could we make it happen, our subject matter expert on this has even had it running on a car dashboard. So it really is a great tool, but it has given this enormous flexibility and versatility again to respond to the changing situation. And over the last 12 months, one of the things we've had to do around AppsAnywhere is integrate MFA, multi-factor authentication, into that environment. And I think I should also point out the absolutely amazing work that's been done by our software licensing team at Durham, working with the sector and suppliers to address some of the challenges that are baked into the historic origins of some of these applications, which were all about the fact that, you know, there were restrictions on how you could access it and all sorts of other things we've had to find a way to work around. The other challenge that then emerged was actually we didn't necessarily have all the right equipment to be able to deliver remote teaching. And one of the things that we then had to do was find a way to get the appropriate equipment out to the staff that needed it. So I've put here, I'm sorry, it's probably a little bit hard to read, but there is a screenshot of our university webpage that lists the different remote teaching equipment that has been available to those staff who are involved in teaching. And they put in a request via self-service. There's a process flow there which gets their head of department to sign off that that's a legit request. And then we work out the logistics of getting that equipment to people wherever they are in the world. And we have, you know, like other organizations, onboarded people over the last 12 months, some of whom haven't ever been on campus, but they still need to be able to do their job from wherever they are. So we've been sending this kit and other equipment to staff and as I'll say shortly, to students all over the world to make sure that we are able to do it. And the key thing that I'll add here is it hasn't just been about what we've been doing in the IT function to put the equipment and the software in front of the people that need it. The other amazing thing that we've done, and huge kudos to my colleague Nick Whitten and the team in the Durham Centre for Academic Development, is they have produced this amazing resource. The link here is at the bottom, which was effectively a really detailed guide and set of e-learning materials that helped people come to terms with the challenges and provided some real good advice on how to do it. So one of the things, for example, that they mentioned was the fact you don't necessarily need to have a green screen. There are other things that you can do that can give you an equally good output. So that kind of has all tied together. But of course, because we're a university, there are certain things that haven't mapped across. And here's an image of one of our computer classrooms. This is in our Teaching and Learning Centre, which opened in October 2019. And to be fair, it hasn't had a lot of use in the last period because people haven't been able to get in there. So we had to find a way to provide computer lab facilities virtually. Some stuff has been relatively easy, but when you get into the more intensive solutions, we have had to find a different route. And we had some really interesting discussions with the market, including with AWS. The Durham solution was actually to install some dedicated GPU servers in our own data centers and then provide a means of accessing those. We have also done a bit of work that allows people to remote into some of these classroom facilities and use the desktops there as well. But it has been one of those areas where there's been quite a lot of effort to crack that one. It wasn't by any means straightforward. The other thing that we have been doing, and I mentioned that we've issued some kit to students. We've actually issued 2,500 of these Wacom digital tablets. You can see it there at the bottom, because the feedback that we got very early on from that first term of teaching was that there were some struggles in some of those subject areas where you might be doing a lot of calculus or other mathematical equations, or maybe trying to draw molecular diagrams. And tell you what, you try doing it on a device without the proper equipment. It's really hard. I'll admit, hand on heart, I was skeptical about this until I tried it myself. And there were at the moment, some real nuances in that. The best possible experience you can get is actually if you use Office 365 and use OneNote through the web browser environment. It's at the moment a little bit more sophisticated than the native app, but it's really difficult if you're trying to do that with your finger on the touch screen of your smartphone. And I think the academics had a really good point here, which was we actually needed to put some proper equipment in place. And I think the university's response here has been really interesting, which is it's been likened to a lab coat. It's seen as a piece of essential equipment. And if we are going to continue to operate in this way, it may well be that we begin to treat these devices for these cohorts of students, just like that piece of safety equipment. So we do need to do a bit of work to review the impact of these devices being out there in our student body. But it's good because we've got the staff, you've got the same equipment, and the students, if they want it and they don't have an iPad and an Apple Pencil already, suddenly they can begin to do this. And I think there is also a question that we perhaps need to look at as part of that review, which is the tablet's really interesting and it lets you do things when it's plugged into another device, but it's not quite the same as having a laptop with a touch sensitive screen and be able to write direct into that, or having an iPad or another similar Android device. So, you know, really interesting area there. I wanted to also give a shout out to one of our suppliers, and I've put Rock-like because they have been absolutely brilliant in supporting not just us, but I know from talking to other universities, the sector to this very difficult time. And logistically wise, the sending out of all of those pieces of teaching equipment that I mentioned earlier, as well as laptops to people all over the world, has been through this logistic hub. And I you know, have been really impressed by them and the work that they've provided to the university. As I mentioned, I mean, one of the things that Stone have traditionally done for us is manage our waste equipment disposal, and we've had to be a little bit flexible in that over recent times. But again, they've been really accommodating in our approach. There have been some other challenges as we've progressed over the last 12 months, because then we've come out of lockdown on occasions and we've been able to begin to relax some of the controls and have things happening back on campus. But before that, we also had to consider the health and safety of the university and how we do things. So we've developed this 5 tests approach to making sure that as staff come back to working on campus, they're doing so in a safe and controlled manner. And I think testament to that, none of the staff in the IT function of the university have caught COVID through working on campus. And I think actually that's probably true for the university as a whole. We've had a really sound approach. And as you can see from the image here, it's been well promoted on campus. We have, as people have begun to return to campus, because perhaps doing the science experiments in their garage at home wasn't the safest thing to be doing, and we need to get them back into the wet labs and other dedicated facilities, we've had to then shift the support teams back onto campus and be compliant with social distancing and making sure that we're ramping up and keeping that balance right, because we've got a large number of people still working at home, but we've also got people on campus. We've got to get the balance right between supporting both sets and being responsive to different needs as they arise. We were then very quickly into preparing for the start of the academic year in September, October 2020. And over the course of last summer, we did a lot of work with colleagues to understand what we might need to do to support people coming back in. So in the photograph here is one of our rapid MOOCs. We've got 6 of these units in different locations on campus, and they're a perfect facility if people want to try flipped classroom pedagogy and actually record themselves and make content available to people online, and then the class time can be used for more engaging discussion and collaboration. The other things we did, we put more video cameras into some of our rooms so that when people were teaching, the person at the front of the room and the class was visible to people who are online. And we also made some rooms ring fenced so that they may not have had a rapid MOOC in, but if you needed to go and do a recording of something, again, maybe it's for flipped classroom, maybe it's for a seminar or some other thing that you're doing, you had that quiet space and you could go there and not be disturbed. We've also had to keep some of the major projects going. So this is our £42 million computer science building. It's mathematical sciences and computer science, I should point out. And that was a part of the university strategy. We have a vision of doubling our student numbers, both undergraduate and postgraduates, by 2027. And to house the growth in those two disciplines, we needed a new home. So construction on that project began in November 2018, and we finished the building this January 2021. In fact, on the 18th of March, just gone, we had the virtual launch event for everyone who'd been involved in that. But it's been testament, again, to teams like our installations team, that comprises both AV and networking, people who've been working within a COVID-safe environment to make sure that we can continue to deliver facilities. And here's a couple of things from within that building. There is an example of the I've put nearing bezel-less display screens that you can see there making up the mathematical sciences and computer science name. And the other thing in the photograph there is one of our virtual receptionist units. And we've got two of those within this building. And it's one of the things that we're doing around innovation and the smart campus. The link there to the YouTube video is all about the building, which includes some really interesting innovation spaces for recent graduates who are about to embark on careers in tech. So really fascinating environment. The other thing that we've been doing has been to be a pioneering centre for the lateral flow tests that have now become much more common across the country. And one of the things that we did there was to develop and implement the Microsoft Bookings capability. And so we've used Bookings to construct a simple but effective web form to allow both students and staff to book a lateral testing slot at any of the 4 sites on campus that we were using. And one of the things that we get from that is an output, a simple sheet that we can share overnight once bookings close and get some value from. So this has allowed us to manage demand for supplies and the logistics around that and running those sites, while avoiding for the students and staff going for a test, the queuing and maintaining social distancing. And I have to say, my local test centre made me wait outside for an hour in the cold. I think it was about 3 degrees. And I was rather envious of the facilities at Durham, which were getting people through in a fraction of that wait time. So some amazing stuff there. We've also used that Microsoft Bookings capability at our service desk. It's a bookings only now. If you need to physically go and visit the service desk, and you use that tool to book your slot. We've also been very conscious about the need to be inclusive in what we're doing. I think we want to challenge some of the conceptions that all students attending Durham could afford a device. And we set up and have been operating a student loan laptops for learning scheme. And that has been providing support for a modest number of students over the course of the year. That hasn't been necessarily that they haven't had a device. Sometimes the device that they've got is broken. And one of the things that we've used that scheme to do is to deliver laptops to students in need, maybe because they're also self-isolating and they can't go and get their computer fixed somewhere else. One of the other things we did as an institution was also to recognise that the need in this space was outside of higher education, and following the well-publicised scheme that was covered in the BBC News, we've also provided some laptops to a local school in Bolton Colliery to support them in what they're trying to do, which is educate people at a different tier within the UK education system. Here is I'm going to share this with you. I'm going to delve into a bit of detail, because as we were doing all of this, one of the things that came up around accessibility was this question on captioning and transcription, because new UK digital accessibility regulations came into force in September 2018, but the real date that was important for people was last year. And so those regulations are sort of really driving people towards the WCAG standards. And we wanted to really understand what the state of the art was. And we've looked at this on a sort of every 3 years for a few years. And we wanted to understand how much these machine services had caught up with human services. So you can see here a list of different products that we looked at and variously included in our test or not. We adopted a scientific research approach with a repeatable process, and we used a piece of Python software to do the analysis and comparison of the output of that. And the results were really surprising. One of the things that the test looks at is word error rate. And so we had a series of recordings of university teaching, and there was a real range here in the nature of the person talking. Some people had very strong regional dialects, or maybe English wasn't their first language and they had, again, a pronounced accent. But the other thing that was a variable was the quality of the audio recording. And you can see that for different recordings, there is variation. I think one of the recordings was actually in a foreign language, which is why a couple of the products spectacularly failed to translate anything, because they didn't have a lexicon in that foreign language. But there was quite a range across the products that we tested in that space. We were pleasantly surprised that Panopto, which is the university's lecture capture solution, actually was the highest performing product in that test. And that actually uses a tuned version of a product from a company called Speechmatics. And you know, that's also used by other vendors in the market. One of the most interesting things out of that exercise was that the freemium products in this space are actually performing really well. And I picked out two of them here that we looked at, which is both Microsoft Teams and the YouTube service, which I kind of suppose is really Google, isn't it? But those two products outperformed, and this is machine intelligence and translation, outperformed human transcription from firms who were charging £55 an hour for translating just one transcript. So I think that technology has come on massively, and I think we're only going to see that grow and grow. But I think it's testament to what the hyperscalers are now capable of in that AI space. My other lesson from this exercise was, don't believe the claimed accuracy from some of the companies that are offering these services. We found that often they were not being met. So that aside, one of the other things that we've been looking at over the last 12 months is how we tackle some of our core business. And one of those things has been student recruitment. And I have spoken on this at a national level recently. In 2015, we started a journey to transform our approach to student recruitment and admissions, and most of that's been built on a CRM platform from Microsoft called Dynamics. And over the time, we've enhanced that by adding in a human chat function, and most recently, we've been wanting to take that to the next level and introduce an AI component to that. And part of that is global university working to support a global market around the clock. But if you're only working an equivalent 9-to-5 day, there's 2/3 of the day where there's potentially no one there to answer from a human chat perspective. And of course, you could extend the day and offer that service for longer, but wouldn't it be neat if you had a robotic means of providing a really high caliber service? So This isn't new. I think those of us who've been part of this regional BCS group have been up to see folks at Sage more than once, and we've seen what an amazing job they've done with PEG. Kudos to them, it's absolutely terrific, and I've shared this with a few people here. But of course, AI is now part of our domestic environments, and if you've got a device from Amazon at your home, you may well be using Alexa, and maybe you've got Siri or Cortana in your pocket. I mean, we're just seeing some amazing things happening, and other universities are already doing some really stuff in this space. I'd shout out the team at Lancaster, who for a number of years now have had a skill within Alexa that you can ask as a student in accommodation, you know, what are my predicted grades for this term? And if you give the right credentials, it validates your identity, it'll tell you. It's amazing stuff that is being done. So I think we were keen to capitalize on that. We've been looking at how we can do so using some of the investments we already had in Dynamics, in Azure, and then moving into the use of Microsoft's cognitive services. And what we've come up with is something called Holly, and you can see the logo for Holly there at the bottom. But Holly is now embedded into the university's student recruitment and admissions web pages, and is answering, and has been since just before Christmas, answering queries from prospective applicants all over the world. And one of the really interesting stats from the use of Holly is that almost 50% of the queries that Holly answers come in out of hours. So certainly it has helped us be a more accessible university, and you know, there is a view of what it's like to begin to engage with Holly, and there's a personality there, ability to handle small talk. But one of the things that I think we were really taken with in our selection of this solution was the ethical angle had been really well considered by the company that we've been working with, a firm called ICS AI, and that I think is a really important thing for us. And I think as a society we should be genuinely interested in that and concerned if we're not seeing people addressing that thorny issue. So I'm drawing towards a conclusion, you might be pleased to know. Next steps. So I think we see ourselves doing more innovations. In the last 12 months, despite all the other things that have been happening, we have managed to do some quite interesting stuff. I'm not sure that people working in other sectors would consider some of this stuff bleeding edge, but I think within the higher education sector, we're getting towards that point. So the Azure AI chatbot we spoke about, we've delivered a low-code platform to allow us to get more towards that high velocity IT, that agile, that DevOps, getting solutions in front of people more quickly. We're doing some really interesting stuff. In fact, Alistair joined a session that I ran within the sector last month, looking at the intelligent campus as a concept and the technologies we're putting into our buildings within higher education now on our campuses that are enabling us to do things like space utilization and monitoring and other things in a manner that we haven't been able to do before. People are all about the digital self, where we need to get into the digital university and begin to understand more about how our facilities are being used. And of course, COVID has really highlighted the need for that in many cases. And the virtual receptionist, I mentioned that before, but we want to keep this going. There's more stuff that we can be doing in this space, and we're actively working as a team on the next set of things that will come out of this initiative. Our biggest challenge, that still remains teaching, because I think the reality is that teaching will again be different this year. Some students will be able to attend campus, while others will still only be able to attend at a distance. At any point, we think circumstances may change again, and that will affect individuals, groups, and whole cities. And I think we will all have to adapt to social distancing measures, which we now understand might be around for a bit longer than people had hoped. And we'll be working to government advice and guidance. So these remain very much difficult and uncertain times. We are looking to make sure that we've got the right resources in place to support our staff and our students and meet these challenges head on, and make sure that we're providing effective and flexible learning and teaching experiences and allowing our world-class research to continue. So I think with that, I've probably come to a conclusion, I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Chris, thanks so much for that. There we go. I was going to say, can you stop sharing your screen? But that absolutely fascinating talk. You know, some really interesting innovations going on, but keeping at the core of the business and putting the students at the centre and putting the teaching and learning at the centre of it all. You know, we've been forced into change because of COVID, and I'd be interested in your views as to whether things have happened an awful lot quicker because of COVID, and or would they have happened this way anyway?
So I think that's a really good question, and you've embarrassed me because I probably should have mentioned it in my presentation. I've spoken to a lot of people, both within our university and across the sector, and what I'm variously hearing is that from a higher education perspective, most institutions feel that the situation has catapulted them 5 to 10 years further along the road to digital adoption and modes of digital working than they would have got to without it. So I think the significant challenge for those of us in the sector is, how do we sustain that? Okay, if people have got really used to never printing something out, right, because suddenly the printer that was there in the local coffee room isn't there, and that convenience factor is gone, people probably have started to use digital resources. Some people may well be going through reams of paper at home, but I suspect the majority of people have adopted and are now working in a very different way. So it's how do we build on that? How do we maintain some of the advantage and traction we've got from the current situation?
No, thank you. You know, and you know, I'm sure this is something that's common across the sector in the UK and indeed globally. It's really interesting seeing how other institutions in different parts of the world are adopting with similar and sometimes slightly different challenges. The question there from Graham Moore in the chat: how do you see the idea of home working for non-teaching staff changing going forward? I'm sure this is in Chatham House. There are no union representatives going to.
I won't answer that.
I don't work at the university either.
No, I won't answer that on behalf of the university. What my observation is twofold. So my first observation comes from Microsoft. So many of you might know that Microsoft has a large campus down in Reading. And talking to the team that has responsibility for their estate planning and management, there was a plan at one point to actually increase the size of that campus and build some additional buildings. They've shelved those plans completely, and actually I think they're actually looking to reduce their footprint at that site, because the technologies have come along that have allowed their own workforce to operate in a very different way. And I think that there is a real indicator of the direction that we're seeing, and we're also seeing it in the city and other big financial centres, because it's a means of reducing your rent costs in those very expensive locations. I think the other thing that I would observe is maybe there was a conception for a long time that people just wouldn't be able to do it. Well, I think society's been forced into a situation, and whether it's through homeschooling or doing more shopping than you might have done previously online and doing all sorts of other things, we've all adapted to a new world order which has been outside of our control, and I think people have perhaps begun to realise that things that perhaps they had thought weren't possible are. The flip side to that is it's easy to lose sight that not everyone has got the same quality of experience in that home working environment. So I have mentioned before that I know people whose home working environment is they're sitting on the end of their bed and their desk is an ironing board. Okay, and that we have people at all spectrums within society, and what that environment is, because with a virtual background behind you, nobody can see what's going on, right? But I think generally we have people living in and working in situations which are very difficult, and for those people, absolutely desperate to come back onto a campus or back into an office environment and back to some sort of lower stress, higher quality working environment. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we will face in the future, which is adapting to that and having a provision which meets the needs of all.
Yeah, no, and I think you're quite right, Chris, and it just leads into Andrew's questions, which I'll come to in a second. But that whole thing about digital equality and digital poverty, and not everyone having the same opportunity, whether it's bandwidth, whether it's kit at home, whether it's space to do the things at home, or whether it's a whole set of other social personal circumstances, a real challenge for us moving forward. So Andrew's question is a really good one. Other than the speed of change, has there been anything positive that has come out of the COVID changes that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Yeah, I think the most obvious answer to that has been how we've moved to more collaborative ways of working using some of those technologies. So, I mean, we're using Zoom here tonight, and you can do very similar things in Teams or WebEx now. And it's been really interesting to see how all of those different partners and tech firms have been competing with one another, because for a moment one's held an edge over the other, and then the next one provides an advancement. And it's been interesting to see how many people you can have simultaneously visible in some of these calls. So I think one aspect is we've become more efficient in working. There's a downside to that, which is you can easily get fatigued looking at a screen and just going from one meeting straight into the next, because you don't get that travel time between meetings. But the other thing that I think that I've seen come out of it is people collaboratively working on documents in the way that they didn't before, whereas they might have got together in a room and had a paper document working on it. I think we've seen examples of people doing live co-working on documents, and I think that probably has happened more quickly as a result of the circumstances.
It's a really good point. And taking on collaborative writing and things like Google Docs and GitHub and Overleaf, I wouldn't have been doing it last year, and I'm now picking up as second nature, and it's the way to write with folks. So it's a really interesting one to pick out. George has raised up a question: how do you manage to improve the quality of network signal around the school environment?
Yeah, so
I'm not sure that's a very fair question for
George,
you.
that's a
the
really
government pay more money.
That's a really good question. So do you know, I'll share a statistic which is I don't think going to come as a surprise. I think a significant proportion of our staff and students reported over the first term of teaching this academic year that they experienced some form of network disruption in that experience of trying to participate, learn, teach, whatever it is. And the reality is that often that's outside of our control as a university. We can invest lots of money and then we can improve our facilities on campus, but often in those transactions, you're dependent on nation state telcos and other things which are generally problematic. So I think as a sector, as higher education, we've seen some really good things happen here. JISC as a national body have been working with others to look at a means of improving the experience for learners overseas. And we now have a general access framework agreement which is supporting students in countries like China and providing a means of countering the contention which is going through the Great Chinese Firewall, as an example. But one of the other things that I think we're really interested in exploring at the moment is how we can look at some of those end-to-end metrics. And there are now some really interesting products on the market that let us look at exactly where we're seeing failures in some of those calls and connections.
Well, thank you. That's a really, really good point. There's another question around how we dispose of old equipment and how we use that and share that with other people. And I know there's a growing number of organizations that are looking to do this. As an example, Device.now is somebody a group that are looking to take equipment, cleanse them, make them safe and usable, and put them out to schools in sort of less privileged areas. if you look at the work that's going on in the States, there's a whole set of things, particularly looking at the race question and lack of access to education, and so some really positive work. You might have noticed that Tim Berners-Lee last week suggested that in order to address the digital divide globally, that we as society need to spend £300 billion between now and 2030 to close that gap. So it's not something that Chris can do by clicking his fingers. It's not something that we can do in the Northeast. It is something that is much bigger than universities, much bigger than the IT providers. There's a huge issue around this. I could go. You started me off on something. It's not fair to go off on one. But great. Kate has raised the question: screen fatigue. How do you manage people's attention and well-being by not overwhelming them with continuous meetings?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. One of the things that I've begun to see colleagues doing is to not start meetings on the hour. So people are starting a meeting at 5 past or 10 past, and it just gives people that break between. And again, everyone's circumstances is different, but if that means that you're walking from a room upstairs to the room downstairs and you can put the kettle on, and while the kettle is boiling, walk out and feed the birds or something like that. It's just a break away from the screen, isn't it? So I've seen that both within our own organisation, but I've also seen that happening in business. So I've had to book appointments with people in industry, and the booking slots are never an on the hour or on the half hour. They're staggering it. So I think one of the best ways in which people can tackle it is diary management, but it is a challenge. Sometimes it's quite nice just to pick up the phone and have a phone call with somebody rather than a video call. Okay, and it's easy to forget. I think probably in the last year I've probably had about a dozen phone calls because so much of it has been online. But that's something that we've also got at our disposal. We often forget about.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point that Kate's raised, and we think back to before 12 months ago, and that kind of move between offices, move between meeting rooms. You pass a coffee shop on the way, the travel between offices, or between campuses, between different buildings. You could buy some time, and the whole thing around diary management. I've got a PA. I love her to bits, but her job in life is to fill my day so that there's no gaps. And after 3 hours in, I'm needing to go to the loo, and sorry folks, I gotta go. And it's a really valid point. And this, you'll be pleased to know that the BCS, when it's doing accreditation of HEIs, builds in a 10-minute break every hour, because it's too much, and that it's really, I think there's a long-term piece of work to look at the impact on folks, and on the point that Kate's raised. Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind me asking directly. Hello. There was one other part, which is well-being. How do you deal with that of students? Because there is, some people may be in cramped positions and so on. So that would be helpful to know, because we've got the whole mental health thing going on at our work as well. So do you have something like that to help people cope with these changes, particularly really if they're away from home?
I'm really pleased that you asked that question. So one of the things that we've done in the last 12 months has been to establish a team of mental health first aiders, and that's within our own department, but we're also doing it across the institution more broadly, because I think there has been this real focus on the mental health of people, and I think that it's a really good thing that we've achieved to put that in place. So I think that's one of the things that we've been doing to address that challenge, and I agree with you, is a significant and important thing for us to look at.
And thanks very much for that. And I think that is something that we see in the well-being of higher education students. We see it in the school kids and what is going on with them. And there's again, a long-term knock-on effect, but we see it in everybody's working life, and you know, the different things that stress you out that wouldn't have done before, just because of the environment that we're working in. Folks, thanks very much. Some really, really excellent questions. I'm sure we could continue going for quite some time, but I know that Chris has got, because we're coming out of lockdown and the really important things are starting. So rugby's back on the table, and Chris has got to go to a coaches meeting to sort out how they're going to get the young people back playing the proper game. So can I just take this opportunity to thank you all for your participation and for your attendance, and a huge thanks to Chris for a absolutely fascinating talk. Virtual round of applause.
Thanks everybody, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.